So, it's like 6 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. My phone rings. It's the chief. I was like, oh man, I feel like I just went to sleep. And he says, you got to come in right away. Something happened. I said, bad? He said, no, but come. So I speed over there. It was the chief, the deputy chief, chief ops, the FBI chief, and me. And my chief says, we got a cable from headquarters that Abu Zubaydah is somewhere in the country, and we have to capture him. We have to take him alive. So when everybody turned to look at me, I go, you guys, this country is the size of Texas. It's got 220 million people. What do you mean catch him? You got to narrow it down for me somehow. And one of them says, well, he's constantly moving, which makes it harder. He's moving between Lahore and Faisalabad. Later on, the night we captured him, we also captured his diary, and he knew we were looking for him. So he was one day ahead of us. Like there were a couple times where we'd bust into a place, and there's a cigarette there that's still lit, right? Or there's food that's still warm on the table. We're like, dang it, close again. But no cigar. Sometimes we were 2 days behind. Sometimes we were 15 minutes behind. But he knew we were on him, and we're chasing him all over the doggone country. I said, here's what we're going to do. Everybody's going to leave here. Everybody who's going to. Fist Lead is going to leave here by bus. You're going to arrive at midnight. At 1:30, you leave for your target site. Be in the neighborhood by 0150. 0155 be in line of sight of a target. 0158 get out of the car, and exactly at 0200 break down the door and grab everybody inside, right? And I mean to the second, which is why we synchronized our watches, because we don't want them, we're 5 minutes off, and so they're going to call each other. The Americans are coming, right? You can't risk that. So, almost all of the targets were in Faisalabad. So most of us got on the bus, went to Faisalabad. Everybody else remained in Lahore. And my colleague and I climbed to the roof of the safe house in Faisalabad. And I looked at my watch and I said, oh, 200, here we go. And just as I said the words, we could hear this sound in the distance. Boink, boink, boink. Metal on metal loud. And I said, that's not good. And then we heard shots fired. And I said, oh my God, shots fired. That's not good. And then the walkie-talkie starts crackling. And the guy on the ground's like, shots fired. Shots firewood.
Right.
Well, the location that was nearest to us was the house where earlier in the day, and I've skipped the story, we believed that Abu Zubaydah might be in there. Do you want me to go back and tell you how we identified that house?
Yeah.
So, after the big yellow house, we only had one more site to go to. And the analyst called me back, and he said Abu Zubaydah just made a terrible mistake.
He
said he downloaded his voicemail from a landline, which you could do back then. You call this number, you press, *2, and you can listen to your voicemail on a landline. And I said, oh my God, how could he make such an elementary mistake? He said, I don't know, but man, we have a physical address. I said, oh my God. Well, the physical address was site 14 or 13 as it became. So, we rush over there so excited, and it turns out it's an empty field. Just an empty field.
And
I said, no, this has to be wrong. This is a mistake. We're sure that the call came from this site. And General Muhammad says, no. He said, this is quite common in Pakistan. He said, whenever a lot is divided into a legal subdivision, each lot is assigned a telephone line, even if there's no building on it. And so what poor people do is they'll climb the telephone pole, they'll splice the telephone wire that's assigned to the empty lot, and they'll run a wire to their house so they can make calls, and the phone bill goes to the owner of the lot. And I said, well, how do we find out where the wire's going, because it looks like Medusa's head up there, right? There had to be 500 wires coming out of that thing. He calls this young technical officer from ISI. This kid climbs up the pole and he goes through the wires, like this, and finds this one wire, and he follows the wire literally down the pole like this, and then down the alley, and he goes, it's that house right there.
Wow.
And see, I got chills again thinking of it. And my buddy and I high-fived each other because the night before he said to me, "You think we're going to get him?" And I said, "No, I think we're going to get somebody, but I don't think we're going to get him. He's been too smart so far." So that night, shots fired. We race over to Site 13, and it's chaos. And man, the last thing I said before everybody got on the bus is, "Do not shoot. Our orders are to take him alive."
Alive.
Not shot half to death. So we get there, and it's anarchy, chaos. There's a guy laying in the street who's clearly dead. There's a guy laying next to him who looks like if he's not dead, he's going to be dead in a couple of minutes. And then there's a guy who is screaming bloody murder, completely soaked in blood. And I've shown you the pictures, I think. So I go, "What happened here?" One of the Pax who was on site, a major, he said, "We got him. We got your man." I said, "Where?" "Right here." And it was the middle guy, the guy who looked like he was going to be dead in a couple minutes. I'm like, that doesn't look anything at all like the picture. We had a 6-year-old passport picture. I said, "This guy's 40 pounds heavier. He's clean shaving. He has crazy hair. This guy doesn't look anything like him." So I wasn't sure what to do. So I call the analyst. I'm like, "Look, they shot somebody. They say it's him. I don't know if it's him. It doesn't look like him at all. What do I do?" He says, "Get me a picture of his eye. I'll run a retinal scan." So I kneel down on top of him and I shout, "If the hand, open your eyes." And I get back on the phone. I said, "He's dead or almost dead." His eyes are rolled back in his head and all I can see are the whites. So they had shot him in the thigh, the groin, and the stomach with an AK-47. He was jumping from the roof of the house to the roof of the next door house with these other 2 guys to try to escape. And this Pakistani policeman shot all 3 of them with an AK-47. Killed the first one instantly. He was dead before he hit the ground. Shot the second guy 3 times and then shot the third guy through the leg. So the analyst says, "Get me a picture of his ear." And I never knew that no 2 people on earth have the same ears. It's like a fingerprint. So I took a picture of his ear. I plugged the camera into my phone because phones didn't have cameras back then. I sent it to him. He sent it to headquarters. Headquarters sends it back to him. He calls me and he says, "It's him." I'm like, oh my God. So we commandeer this filthy Toyota pickup truck from this guy who just happens to be driving by, and we stop him. We take him out. We take his pickup truck. We throw Abu Zuba in the back of the pickup truck, and we speed to the hospital. Faisalabad International Hospital. The worst place on earth that I've ever seen in my life. Cats and dogs just walking up and down the halls. Clouds of mosquitoes feeding on people's open wounds. Absolutely disgusting. I would rather be dead than to have to be operated on and recover in a place like this. So, here by now it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, and all these Americans come in dressed as Pakistanis with an Arab who's bleeding to death from gunshot wounds. And I said to the doctor, "Hey, you've got to save this guy because my orders were to take him alive." And he's like, "I don't know what to do. Oh my God." And it's like, "No, you got surgery to do. So get cracking." So they take him in, and we sit down in the waiting room. It's like 4 of us. Well, word got around the Al-Qaeda community that we had gotten him. And so these Al-Qaeda guys began driving by the hospital and just opening fire on the hospital as they're driving by. And we're hitting the ground. And I said to, "Excuse me, Colonel Tark," I said, "if they realize how lightly armed we are, we're dead. Can you get a helicopter in here?" And he said, "I think so." So he calls. 20 minutes later, a helicopter lands in the parking lot. So I put my shirt up over my mouth and I walked into the operating room and I said, "Doc, wrap it up. We gotta go." He's in the middle of the surgery. They just sewed him closed as quickly as they could. He's got blood being pumped into him. It's spilling out of him as quickly as they can pump it out. I said in the book too, we were soaked in blood.
He was soaked in blood.
There's blood pooling on the ground. There's just blood everywhere. So we put him on the helicopter, and we fly to a Pakistani military base about 50 miles away. And they had an 8-bed trauma unit. It was in the form of a hub and spokes, right? So it was circular. There were only like 4 other patients there, and all of them were soldiers who had attempted suicide. So this was the only trauma case that they had, and they knew we were coming, of course. So they rushed him in, and then as the doctor's getting ready, he asked to see me. So I go in where he's scrubbing up, and he said, "Listen, I've never seen injuries so severe where the patient lived. So you need to be prepared for this man to die." So I called the analyst, and I'm like, "Look, this doesn't look good.
So,
You might want to tell headquarters that he's probably not going to live." So he was in there for hours. In the meantime, the analyst called me back, and he said that the director had called George Tennant. He said, "George called and said his only orders for you are 24/7 CIA eyes on. Not FBI, not Pakistani intelligence, CIA, do not leave his bedside." Well, I've been up for 24 hours at this point. I'm tired, right? So I get some coffee. They had a machine, and he comes out of a surgery. And I'm thinking, I can't possibly stay awake. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I tear up a sheet and I tie him to the bed by his wrists and his ankles. He's naked because his wounds needed to be open and exposed, to the air, and it was the most gruesome thing I've ever seen in person. That's not true. They tried to kill a couple of our people in Pakistan a couple of weeks earlier. I saw a human head rolling on the floor. That was more gruesome. But anyway, you get the idea. It was pretty gruesome. So I turned the ceiling fan on full blast to make sure that I stayed a little bit too cold, because I thought if I get warm, I'm going to fall asleep in the chair. And I kept getting up and walking around, and the guy that was shot in the leg was screaming in the other room. So I went in there and talked to him, and he had a story of his own. He was screaming. I said to him, "Kahak, how are you?" And he goes, "Alhamdulillah." Right? Thanks to God. And I said, "Yeah, you don't look so good." He goes, "Are you American?" I said, "Yeah, I caught you." And he says, "The Pakistanis, they held me down. They put a rifle against my leg, and they shot me." I said, "That's not what I heard. I heard you were jumping from the roof of the house to the roof of the next house." And then he gets real serious, and he goes, "I am 150 kilos, 330 pounds. I cannot jump from the roof." So I pull back his blood-soaked phobe, and there was a powder burn the size of a freaking dinner plate all the perfect way around his wound. They held that AK-47 right against his leg and pulled the trigger. And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about that. That happened before I got there. All I know is you're in some big trouble. So you have some decisions to make." And then I went back to Abu Zubaydah's room. So I sat there just living on coffee. As it turned out, I sat with him for 56 hours. 56 hours. I felt like I was starting to hallucinate at the end. I had been so long without sleep. But a buddy of mine brought over some food and a change of clothes, which I wrote about. I smelled so bad, right? There's no time to shower. There's no place to shower anyway. And I've been in the same clothes for days, and I haven't slept. And we've been out in the dust and the dirt. So I smelled bad enough that I was grossing myself out. So he brought me, I should say, a t-shirt from the safe house that I slept in normally. It was something my kids had gotten me. It was a red t-shirt with SpongeBob SquarePants in the center. So about 24 hours into his capture, Abu Zubaydah starts coming out of the coma. And so I'm in the SpongeBob t-shirt. I still have the big poofy Pakistani balloon pants on. And I stood up with my hands on my hips at the foot of his bed. And I was looking at him. And he's laying there tied down. And he looks at me, not really at me though. He looks at SpongeBob. And I say in the book, you can see the exact instant that he realized, oh my God, the Americans have me, because his pulse went from 110 to 220, and the machine starts going beep, and then you hear code blue, code blue. So they run in, and then they shock him, and they give him a shot, and then he's out again. So I sit back down and I eat a little, those little peanut butter cheese crackers. That's all I had. So I'm eating my little peanut butter cheese crackers. 6 hours later, he comes back out of it again. So he's laying in the bed like this, and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him. He's got an oxygen mask on. He motions like this for me to come next to him. So I go next to him, and I moved his oxygen mask over to the side, and I said to him, "Shu, what is your name?" And he shakes his head like this. I said, "Shum." And he says to me in perfect English, "I will not speak to you in God's language." I said, "That's okay, Abu Zubd. We know who you are." And then he starts to cry and he says, "Please, brother, kill me. Take the pillow and
Kill me.
smother me." And I said, "Oh no, no." I said, "Nobody's going to kill you. We've been looking for you for a long time." And he says, "What's going to happen to me?" And I said, "Honestly, I don't know, but I'm going to give you some advice. Your life is over and the rest of it can be easy or it can be terrible." I said, "My friends, they aren't nice like I am. I'm the nicest guy you're going to meet in this experience. So if you do anything, it's that you have to cooperate." He said, "You seem like a nice man, but you're the enemy and I'll never cooperate." I said, "Suit yourself."